Hey, this is Heidi Dawson. If you love all things health and wellness and style of any kind, hang out here with me each week. I'm obsessed with never-ending improvement, and it's all in an effort to help each one of us live a wildly successful lifestyle. Subscribe today so you don't miss a thing.
Hi, guys. Welcome to episode 387 of the Wildly Successful Lifestyle Podcast. I hope this finds you keeping your wits about you, regardless of what's going on in the world. I talked in episode 386 about the idea that when everything feels like it's a mess, you got to keep your wits about you. You have to keep yourself together, meaning don't let your head make matters worse by creating things that aren't there. It's never helpful, unless, of course, you're being optimistic and creating ways to make them better. But that isn't our go-to, right? There are always things to look at that are going to make no sense. There's senseless violence, senseless fighting, senseless hatred. There's tons of that, always has been. And that's a big problem for us, trying to make sense of things that don't make sense and are never going to. It's our human tendency to try to make sense of things so we understand it or we can wrap our heads around it. But there are things in this world we have to be willing to accept that maybe we wish we didn't. But if you're going to thrive in this world, there are things you're going to have to accept as part of life. And a big one is you can't make sense of the world around you, not all of it. And when you try to make sense of the senseless, it wreaks havoc on your inner world. It's tempting to look at the horrible things that happen around the world and think, well, the world isn't a safe place and no one can be trusted, especially people that look like this. This last week, there was news that some insane person across the world called for a day of jihad and for his people to spill the blood of non-believers. Now, I remember going out on that day, and for the most part, I wasn't worried about it. But as I was walking into Costco at one point, there were two men in front of me, and they gave me pause. I thought, oh, do they want to hurt me? Do they have weapons? Of course they didn't, and probably would have been insulted that I'd even thought that. You see, I had allowed some news message I heard creep into my mind. You know how many really great things happened this last week? Probably not. I don't either, because no one talks about them. Bad, scary news, that sells. Our minds left on autopilot or our minds distracted are so easily swayed. The sense we make of the world, if we aren't careful, is whatever the person screaming the loudest says it is, or whatever our news of choice decides it is. Our opinions sway with the wind if we aren't careful. So does our mood. There are going to be wars. People are going to disappoint us. Life is going to change in a moment and not always for the good. No one gets to escape the circumstances of life. Everyone has circumstances they can't control. Everyone has stuff in their lives they wish were different. We all have hard things. It's what we do consistently that makes a difference. We aren't going to make sense of the whole world, but we can make sense of our own world. So can you thrive when things seem bad? You can, and you must. I realized this last week. It was a super stressful time. And I realized that during super stressful times, it's more important than ever to do the things that help me thrive. And some of us live in super stressful times all the time, feels like. So what I observed last week when my life was hectic and uncertain and stressful, my little Yorkie Kinsey was in the hospital. None of the doctors expected her to come out. Eric, my husband, was out of town the whole week. I had a couple projects with work that were a little unpredictable. And war broke out in various parts of the world. And it was hideous what was going on. But what I realized is that I wanted to hide. I wanted to cry and be mad and distract and eat comfort food and not move and not exercise. But I also realized that it was imperative to stick to a routine when things seemed overwhelming. My fight or flight was strong, and that makes me want to not exercise, to not clean my house, to not eat healthy, not meditate. I wanted to distract myself, basically stop doing all the things I do that makes my life better. Stop doing all the things I do that make me stronger, that make me thrive. Isn't it interesting when we need it the most, it's the hardest to do? But because my routine is so ingrained, I didn't completely go off the rails. I simply modified it. So instead of hard workouts with Kevin, my trainer, I did yoga. Instead of sprint runs, I made sure I kept walking every day. I read books instead of getting on social media and looking at those horrible videos coming out of Israel all day. Now, I allowed myself 15 minutes to touch base with it, and then I turned it off. I also planned out and decided up front how I wanted any phone calls for work to go before I made them. At one point, I had to make a call to a vendor that had blown me off 3 times about window treatments I had ordered for a client, which is pretty frustrating and somewhat out of the ordinary for him. So I knew I needed to go over how I wanted that call to go. Otherwise, I could have been a ticking bomb because it was such a stressful week. And so that's what I did. I went over the call in my head and how I wanted it to go. And I was really proud of how it turned out. I didn't get mad. I just asked him how I could help him help me. Turns out he was having a rough week too. His child was in the hospital as well. You don't know what other people are going through either. Never forget that. So how making sense of my world looked this week, it had me eating mostly healthy. Not always. I had a few comfort food additions. It had me still moving my body, not the way it normally looks, but just in a gentler way. It had me filling my mind with a book of my choice instead of being dragged through the gauntlet of social media all day. I allowed for a little time, but guarded my mind for the most part. When you can't make sense of the world, it's crucial that you make sense of your own world. My challenge to you today is, first of all, make sure to create a solid routine for your mind and body so when things get rough, and they will, you have that to fall back on. And when it really does get tough and you can't hit your whole routine, modify it. Don't eliminate it. Your sanity really does depend on it. Share this with anyone struggling to make sense of the world right now. I love you guys. I'll talk to you in a few days.
Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends, because we're just going to keep going bigger and better places together, and I love that about us. Talk to you in a few days.